So if someone comes super stressed out, what do you prescribe?
Just being outside. You also have to fix the mind-body connection. I want to see if their secretory IgA is low or is it super high because they're fighting off an infection. What we find is that there's different micro ecosystems in different areas of the gut.
Dr. Pedre, you've been dubbed the gut whisperer. The audience wants to know the single most transformative tip you've discovered in gut health.
Ooh, that's always a tough question to answer. But from my 20 years of experience helping people with all sorts of gut issues and looking at diet, supplements, all those things, see how can you restore balance back to the gut and the gut microbiome. And the one thing that I've learned is that you can't out supplement and you can out diet a stressed out lifestyle. Stress is one of the biggest gut disruptors. And if you don't deal with the stress, if you think you're doing everything right because you're doing the right diet and you're doing all the right supplements, and yet you're living in your stressed out type A life, never taking a break, not having balance, not taking time to be in nature, to meditate, get enough sleep, you're not going to fix your gut. And that's been the number one obstacle that I've seen a lot of people face. Now, granted, yes, it's much more nuanced than that. And if you have a parasite, you've got to fix that. But you also have to fix the mind-body connection and the gut-brain connection, because that is one of the most powerful influences on the gut and the health of the gut in the long term. And it also influences your behavior, like how people take care of themselves. So for me, it's hacking your stress is one of the most important interventions. And I used to start with diet supplements first and then think like, oh, we'll get to like the stress part. And now I think it's backwards. Got to work on mindset, got to work on stress, and work on diet and supplements and whatever else needs to be done to rebalance the gut. But if you ignore the stress and you treat that as an optional, as another thing that you can do, but you're going to just focus on diet and supplements, you're missing a big part of the picture.
So if someone comes with super stressed out A-type, what do you prescribe besides diet?
It could be as simple as getting out into nature.
Yeah.
There was a study that showed that spending time in nature, which could be a park or could be outdoors, like going on a hike, just being outside surrounded by nature for 30 minutes, 3 times per week, lowered blood cortisol levels. So if someone likes to be outdoors, if they like being in nature, they're not the type who likes to be in a class, like doing yoga, then I try to meet the person where they're at.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to change behavior by telling someone to do something that they don't particularly like to do. So I like to figure out what is it that they most like. Can I get them to do breath work? You know, maybe just teaching them deep diaphragmatic breathing and have them do 15 minutes of deep diaphragmatic breathing every day. That by itself can start modulating your stress response and activating the vagus nerve, or get them to do yoga, or get them to go learn Tai Chi or Qigong. It's really about, it's resetting that stress set point in the body. And for some people, it requires rewiring their addiction to stress. Because a lot of people that live in a stressed out type A environment,
it's addicting.
They're kind of addicted to that, or they're habituated to it because it's their normal.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'll also find that people are oblivious to the stress that they're carrying, because mentally they don't feel stress, but they're carrying an extremely full plate. But their bodies are freaking out. Their hormones are out of balance. They're not sleeping well. So I tell them, do you realize that even if you don't think you're stressed, your body is freaking out? You are biophysically stressed. So I think there's two ways that stress can be measured or taken in by us. It's either mental stress, you get anxious, you worry about things, or sometimes it's a person has such a high set point on what they can handle that it's their body that is freaking out. And sometimes for me, I think of myself as, you said gut whisperer. I also sometimes say body whisperer, because it's like I'm communicating to the person what their body's trying to tell them, but they're just not listening.
Yeah, I noticed last week we had 6 interviews, and I was pretty stressed out, actually. So I went to the Hamptons, and I just left my phone in the bedroom on airplane mode for 3 days. And I came back completely recharged, and that's just what I needed. I needed to disconnect and
digital detox.
Take a bike ride to the beach.
And you're by the ocean. To me, the ocean is one of the most grounding places to go. I go to Miami, and the minute I put my feet on the sand, I can feel a total shift.
Do you believe in the electric signals we get from earthing?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's very important. Like getting your bare feet on the sand, on the grass, connecting with the earth. I think that's a very stabilizing effect. When I was writing my second book that came out last year, The Gut Smart Protocol, there was a period where I was in a very tight editing schedule. So I was getting pretty stressed because I was getting the manuscript back and I had to turn it around in like 2 weeks. There was a lot of reading, a lot of editing. So, and overwhelming while I'm still, practicing as a doctor, doing all the other things I do. And then on top of that, I've got this book I'm editing. And I was getting close to like not sleeping well. I was starting to feel irritable. You could ask my son. I was sometimes kind of impossible to be with. And we flew to Miami. And that day that we went to Miami, I was feeling really anxious. And I'm not an anxious person, like almost panicky. And I think it was just, I was in this overwhelm from everything that was on my plate. And as soon as we got there, we went out to the beach, put our feet on the sand, hung out by the seashore. And literally within 15 minutes, I felt my entire nervous system reorganize itself. I felt grounded. All of that sense of panic and anxiety left my body, and it didn't come back. Like I was reset. So I do believe in the power of that. And I think there's nothing more powerful than when you experience it yourself. One thing is to hear it, and to hear people tell you like, oh, if you do this, you're going to feel better. And I think a lot of people hear that but then their minds contradict and say, no, that's not really going to work for me. So they don't even try it. So for anybody who's listening, I say, if you're a bit of a skeptic, put your skepticism aside and do it. Like try it out. See what happens for you. I think a lot of times people need those reminders. Like we all need reminders. I had a patient recently who is a very high performing person, has a lot of demands on them. And we were talking about their childhood, and in their childhood, they enjoyed going out into nature, and they lived in an area where they could go out in nature very easily. And in nature, they could just be themselves, and they would have fun and sing and dance and whatever, like just being free as a kid in nature. And I said, well, why can't you do that now as an adult? Like obviously nature is a grounding place for you. And sometimes all we need is that person to hear from the outside and remind us of what we already know. It's just, we're not paying attention to it.
Why should our audience continue watching and listening to this conversation?
What I try to convey is a different perspective on health that empowers the person to find the healing that is inside, that's waiting to be unlocked. So if they want to hear more about that and about gut health and potential biohacks and the gut-brain axis and all sorts of cool facts about how the gut affects our overall health, then they should listen to this episode.
What is the gut-brain axis?
It's basically this connection between the gut and brain that happens primarily through the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body, and it's part of the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's actually quite fascinating because the vagus is divided into two branches. One is called the ventral vagus, and the other one is the dorsal vagal pathway. The ventral vagal pathway innervates the lungs and the heart and controls things like what happens when you breathe in. When you breathe in, your heart rate speeds up. When you breathe out, your heart rate slows down. That's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. That's being controlled by your vagus nerve. So that's the direct connection between the breath and the heart rate, but also the breath and control of the vagus. Then you have the dorsal vagus, which is the more reptilian, ancient part of the vagus. It's connected to the brainstem, and it's a very slow fiber, so it's actually not myelinated, so it's not insulated, and that signals down to the gut. So the dorsal vagus is connected with kind of like what reptiles do if they're under attack, they'll play dead. So the dorsal vagus is involved with this reflex of just disconnecting. When the dorsal vagus is activated, a person can feel depressed, they can feel withdrawn, they don't want to get out of bed. When you're in ventral vagal, you're in this parasympathetic state where your body feels safe. So it's very important to understand the differences between the two, and the gut is the connection between the vagus and the brain because more nerve fibers are pointing up from the gut to the brain via the vagus nerve. About 80% of those fibers are actually sending signals up to the brain, and 20% are sending signals back to the gut. Now, both directions are important, so it's a bi-communication superhighway. But obviously, there's greater influence coming from the periphery up to the brain. And there's different ways. So the bacteria in the gut are producing neurotransmitters like serotonin. The serotonin produced in the gut stimulates serotonin receptors in the nerve endings of the vagus that are all around the gut lining, and then sends signals up to the brain. But the gut, when we're talking about the gut-brain axis, there's also a humoral connection. So the gut microbiome is producing all sorts of postbiotic products. So we know that probiotics, they're healthy bacteria that support health. These bacteria produce postbiotics, so they're products of their metabolism, and those get absorbed into the circulation, and some of those have a very positive influence on our brain health, like memory and learning. So that goes through the bloodstream. And then some of them are producing, we're also getting hormones produced by the gut, like the enteroendocrine cells. They're almost like the second biggest endocrine organ, even though it's not concentrated in one spot. They're spread out throughout the entire gut, and they produce all types of bioactive peptides and signals that affect things like hunger, satiety, all of that stuff.
How can you specifically choose one vagus or the other vagus to work on?
How are you going to activate your ventral vagus?
Ventral. So ventral, and then what's the other one?
Dorsal vagus.
Dorsal. And
so
dorsal is
normally,
the primal one.
Dorsal is the primitive one.
Yeah.
Ventral is the part of the vagus that actually evolved in mammals. So it's quite interesting because when you look at the evolution from reptiles to mammals, mammals care for their young, right? They need to nurture their young. So there needs to be a connectedness. Whereas reptiles are born and they're fully mobile, like they can already get out into the world. But mammals, for the most part, not all of them, but a lot of them aren't mobile when they're born, right? Humans, babies, they need to be coddled, they need to be cared for. And a lot of that interconnectedness is coming through the vagus nerve and the social networks in the brain. So the ventral vagus creates a sense of security and safety in the body. So we probably like previously learned about like fight or flight or rest and digest, right? And we looked at those as the two opposing forces of the autonomic nervous system. And then Stephen Porges started researching this and realized that that couldn't explain every single response that was happening, and realized that there was another branch to the vagus. And so he developed what he called the polyvagal theory, which explains this connection between the vagus and our health, but the ventral vagus versus the dorsal vagus. So the goal is to be in ventral vagal mode. That is the ultimate goal.
That's parasympathetic?
Because that's what we normally associate with parasympathetic, relaxed.
Ventral vagal.
We are in a safe and secure space. That's the space in which your body can heal. So we can get into ventral vagal through yoga. many different ways.
Sauna.
Yeah, like meditative practices, breath work, like deep breath work, but also interestingly by ways that we can stimulate the vagus nerve. So even fermented foods, because they promote good bacteria and they promote the production of those like neuroactive peptides that then stimulate the vagus nerve. That's another way to activate the vagus nerve. And there's certain ways, like, you know, if we're talking about activating, like, well, how does the vagus get deactivated? Like, and what happens when that ventral vagus is not functioning properly? Person can feel depressed. You lose your appetite. You can't digest food well. So imagine that you're going through a major heartbreak, like your partner just broke up with you, and you're feeling sick to your stomach, you lose your appetite, maybe you're not going to the bathroom as much, your bowel movements aren't as regular.
Can't sleep.
Yeah, you can't sleep. That's all ventral vagal deactivation. So you've lost ventral vagal tone and you're getting all of these symptoms. So almost anybody listening to this podcast has probably at some point in their lives been affected by low vagal tone. And when we're talking about that, it's low ventral vagus. If you have major depression, they found in one study that treatment-resistant depression could be reversed in up to 37% of the people that were in this study by stimulating the ventral vagus using vagal stimulators. There's different devices that you can apply to the neck because the vagus runs here right along the voice box. You can also sing. You can hum. The vibration of the voice box is going to then be felt by the vagus and activate the vagus nerve. You can gargle with water. I don't think people would want to do this, but you can also take like a tongue depressor and gag yourself, and the gag reflex activates the vagus nerve. So there's different ways that we can coax the vagus nerve to get activated. People are chronically constipated. A lot of them are in high stress mode. When you're in high stress, your ventral vagus is going to shut off. So then maybe you find like you go out to dinner and the food doesn't sit well. Well, because your vagus also is necessary for the secretion of all gastric enzymes, hydrochloric acid, to be able to digest protein. So you need that vagal tone. So I said, 20% of those fibers are coming from the brain down to the organs. Part of what they're doing is controlling gut permeability, controlling the secretion of digestive enzymes, controlling the rhythmic contractions of the intestines so you're not constipated. And so another thing that can shut off the vagus is a traumatic brain injury. Like if you were had some sort of major concussion, then that shuts off the vagus and that causes poor digestion, leaky gut, constipation, and can even cause mood disorders. So low vagal tone is connected with depression. So that ties in the gut-brain axis and kind of like
A lot of good info here.
complex and nuanced ways that they affect each other. It's almost like one of these things, like a Pandora's box. Like once you open it and you start discovering, it's like a rabbit hole. There's so much information.
I purchased the Pulsetta vagus nerve stimulation device. Every time I've taken it before sleep, it does the opposite for me. I can't go to sleep afterwards.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then sometimes after using it, my neck vein is, I think maybe the vagus nerve vein. It's like it's pulsing.
Interesting.
Because I use it for 10 minutes, and then afterwards, and then I try to go to sleep, and it's like it's pulsing. Just.
Have you heard of the Sensate?
I have Sensate.
You have that one?
Beautiful music. Yeah, I like to combine it with ketamine therapy.
That one you put here.
Yeah, and travel
on your chest.
Yeah. Well, I always thought was if you optimize your circadian rhythm, you start with sleep, nutrition, exercise, routine, wake up early, and you just consistently stay the same. I had my urine analysis test, and I saw that my hormones spiked at 11 a.m. My cortisol spiked at 11 a.m. So I tried to wake up earlier and get that spike earlier, because don't we want to be in sympathetic during the day and then parasympathetic in the evening to rest, to work? Or do we want to just be in Vegas, be in parasympathetic?
You kind of want to have
day?
A balance of both.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So
the primal vagus is
heart rate variability is basically a measure of the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So the problem is that most people in the world are tipped over. So they're running on sympathetic mode.
Yeah.
And not really running enough parasympathetic.
Right.
So they're too much in fight or flight and not enough in rest and digest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree that you need some sort of circadian rhythm to the day. And maybe the Spanish have it right, because they start their day early, then they take a siesta in the afternoon, then they have the second part of the day.
But then they eat really late at night.
Yeah, that's the only bad thing, because then
they siesta.
You get acid reflux from eating so late at night. However, Spain has one of the longest life expectancies in the world.
Really? Who is the first?
Ooh, that's a good question. Blue zones, Japan maybe, Okinawa.
So if we're with our partner at night watching TV, and if you're like me, I can't watch TV without eating something. So it used to be ice cream, but I quit that habit a long time ago. So I switched to popcorn because I like popcorn. Is popcorn a healthy evening snack?
Oh, that's a tough one. It depends on the state of your gut, right? And obviously then it gets even more nuanced, like where did the corn come from? You know, I'm assuming you're having non-GMO corn, hopefully organic corn.
It is, but it's still made in the microwave.
And how was it? Yeah, exactly.
So how was it organic? But it's
how was it popped?
Yeah,
if it's popped in the microwave, then it's in a bag that has fire retardants in it. So you're getting those endocrine disruptors.
It just tastes better than me popping it on the stove.
Or like an air popper.
What's an air popper?
You can pop the popcorn just with hot air.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, instead of that way you avoid the toxins. But the thing is, look, it's still more of a refined sugar when it breaks down. So say you had yeast overgrowth or you have dysbiosis, it's going to be fueling the flames of that. So it's not going to be good for the gut.
Okay. So those of us who are forced to watch TV shows with our girlfriends at night before bed, what's the healthy snack?
Right before bed. So you should be fasting before bed.
Yeah.
So I would say
brush your teeth and drink sparkling water.
Yeah, or actually what I would do is drink a tea. Like have an evening tea or
bone broth?
Or like a kava tea. I mean, technically you should be fasting, so bone broth would break your fast. So I would say tea. Kava
and Crantum. You like kava?
I love kava. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It's a good stress reliever.
Yeah. Is it kava's from Hawaii, right?
Mm-hmm.
And crantum is from Southeast Asia?
I think so.
Yeah, it's an opiate, crantum.
That one I'm not as big of a fan.
Okay, but there's this drink.
But making a tea out of kava can be really nice, and I recommend it to my patients who tend to have a lot of evening anxiety, or actually as a hack for the late night munchies, drinking kava.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of times what's happening late at night when someone's getting those cravings, whether it's for sweet or for salty, you have to ask yourself, am I really hungry right now? Like, do I need to eat right now to survive? Usually the answer is no, not really hungry, eating out of stress, eating out of boredom. And so for me, a good hack is like not saying like, oh, don't do that, because then you leave the person with nothing. So instead, having a tea, because a tea is warm, a tea kind of fills you up for the moment. Cravings usually only last about 15 to 20 minutes. It's like this big, rise. It's like a wave, and then it almost becomes a monster that feels like it's going to take over you unless you fulfill it. And yet, if you just wait a moment, it's going to pass. You could do some breath work or drink a kava tea. It soothes the nervous system, because a lot of times these cravings are coming from anxiety. From just the anxiety of the day is finally like coming out.
I think it's just like sitting still and watching something. I can't just sit still. I have to be consuming or moving. Yeah. I think minerals and sparkling water also help crave hunger.
Even hydration, because a lot of times people think they're hungry, but actually what they really are is they haven't hydrated enough throughout the day. So they're dehydrated, and that's masking as hunger.
There's so many companies out there selling probiotics, postbiotics, prebiotics. Where can we find the optimal strain for gut-brain connection optimization for our vagus nerve through whole foods, fermented foods? Kefir, A2 yogurt?
Kefir is one.
Kimchi?
Yeah.
Natto?
I think kefir is a really good one, especially if homemade kefir, because it's going to have much higher counts. And there was actually a study done where they had women who had a high anxiety drink a kefir drink, so like a drinkable yogurt, and log their anxiety score at the beginning and at the end of 2 weeks. And there was a statistically significant difference. Their anxiety reduced by drinking the kefir. There was also another study that, do you have a question about that?
Yes. What was the source of kefir? Was it sheep? Was it cow? Was it A2?
I think it was just regular. Yeah, it wasn't like they were looking at like, kefir. Yeah, normal kefir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Every day. What was the amount? What was the serving size? Do you know?
Like a shot.
A shot. Okay. 1 cup or something.
Yeah.
What was the other study you mentioned?
The other study was a study on perceived stress. And they took a group of people, I think it was about 45 people, split them into 2 groups. And they were looking at the effects of a psychobiotic diet on perceived stress and the gut microbiome. And so one group, they had them increase their fiber foods to like, I think 6 to 8 servings per day. Fermented foods, 2 to 3 servings per day.
6 to 8 servings of fiber is how many grams per day in the study? Do you remember?
The people who participated were having, on average, let's say before the study, like 20 grams, and they increased them to 40 to 50 grams of fiber per day through food. The other group, this was done in Ireland, was just told to eat the food pyramid, but avoid like sugar and processed foods. So they were given just kind of like what would be considered more general dietary advice, whereas the intervention group was given very specific advice on how much to increase certain foods. And then they had these people track their dietary compliance. And that was really interesting, because what they found in the end is that the diet intervention group lowered their perceived stress by 37%. Whereas the placebo group that was just eating, less sugar, like just kind of a general dietary guideline, theirs dropped by 17%. So the difference was statistically significant between the two groups. There was no psychotherapy being done. It was just basically solely a nutrition intervention on healthy individuals who were stressed. And it was interesting because then you think, okay, without any intervention whatsoever, no psychotherapy, no cognitive behavior therapy, all they did was change their diet, and that changed how their brain was responding to stress.
That would be considered a prebiotic fiber, right?
Prebiotic fiber plus the fermented foods are probiotics.
Yeah.
And then you're getting the benefit of postbiotics that are being produced by the bacteria. Or I think people don't think of this normally when you're thinking about eating a fermented food, like you're thinking that you're getting the bacteria that's in the food.
Yeah.
But it's much more complex than that, because they've shown that fermented foods actually increase the presence of other favorable bacteria that are in the gut. So when you're eating like yogurt, kefir, there's this thing called cross-feeding, where one group of bacteria produces certain types of postbiotic products, like acetate, for example, that then cross-feeds other groups of beneficial bacteria that use that as their fuel.
This is interesting. Okay.
So, because one thing that I wondered is, well, if you're having a fermented foods, how is that going to increase the diversity of the gut microbiome if it just has certain strains, like a yogurt might have a Lactobacillus bulgaricus, but how is that going to affect the rest of the gut? And apparently what happens is they create an environment that then supports the growth of other beneficial probiotic bacteria in the gut.
I wish there was a way we could test this, keeping a probe in our gut for 30 days and seeing how it grows or something.
It's complicated. There was a study.
You can't test it,
right? There was a study done where they actually did an endoscopy and took samples from different parts of the gut. And what we find is that there's different micro ecosystems in different areas of the gut. So it's not all the same. They were looking at like how effective is it to look at a stool specimen versus getting some sample higher up in the gut, and are they going to be the same? And they're not. They're different. They're all of these things are windows into the gut. In the end, I think there's a certain level of complexity to the system that we don't fully understand yet. But we just have like a lot of tools that peer into the gut in the same way that we have all these biometric devices now that can give us different measures of our sleep, our heart rate variability, all of that. They're all windows into our body, but not one is a full picture of everything that's happening.
So obviously fermented foods and prebiotic fibers. Now, is diversity key? Multiple strains of fermented foods, multiple strains of prebiotic fibers?
That actually ties into another question I know you had.
Yeah.
Which was about something that I believe that now I think differently about.
Oh, yeah.
Here's a big one that I wrote about in my latest book, The Gut Smart Protocol. And it has to do with what it takes to create diversity in the gut microbiome. So in functional medicine for years, and I've been practicing functional medicine for over 15 years now, they tell us that the key to diversity is eating the rainbow, like eating a very diverse diet. And I very much believe this. I thought, well, that makes a lot of logical sense. You're getting different nutrients from different plant-based products, like eating pomegranates and berries and dark chocolate and all sorts of greens and onions and leeks and asparagus, all of that stuff. Of course, you want a diverse diet and you want to rotate those foods on a regular basis. And then I got invited to go to Tanzania in 2020 to visit and stay with the Hadza, one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes
on
the planet.
It's amazing.
And the reason that I was really excited about this is that I had heard a lecture from a guy the year before who had been with the Hadza and presented like what's really amazing about them. They have no diabetes, they have no heart disease, they have no high cholesterol, they have no obesity, they don't get cancer. So they're kind of like pristine. You know, they haven't been exposed to antibiotics. So someone had the great idea of collecting stool specimens from the Hadza. And then they used an Italian group of control subjects. So they tried to age match them. The age ranges were from 8 years old all the way to like 60s. And they looked at the stool of the Hadza, doing a PCR analysis versus the stool of the Italian control. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine, they're eating a Mediterranean diet. It's a pretty varied diet. It's got lots of like legumes and vegetables and fish. And it's one of the most ideal diets on the planet, right? It's one of the most, it's been shown to be one of the healthiest diets.
It's a tough competitor. Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Hadza are eating about 5 different foods. They basically forage for tubers, which are like these root vegetables that are very similar to jicama in a sense. They're like a very watery, crunchy potato.
Yeah.
Wild berries. They go forage for wild honey, and they'll eat everything. The honeycomb, the honeybees where they live in Tanzania are actually kind of very unique. They look like tiny little flies. They're not like the way we think of honeybees here that are big. They look like little, like tiny flies. And so they forage for honey, and that makes part of and honey, by the way, is enriched with over 200 different bioactive peptides.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty amazing superfood, honey. And then they eat baobab fruit, which is very high in fiber. And baobab comes from the tree that you've seen it if you watch The Lion King, that very classic tree in Africa that has a very thick trunk and then really wide branches.
Okay, beautiful tree. Yeah, I love that tree.
And then they eat small to large game animals. So because of their historical hunting practices, they have an exemption where they can hunt things like zebras, whereas no one else can hunt a zebra. But if they have the ability to do that. And so they're eating just about 5 different foods and not a lot of color. Even the berries, the wild berries there don't have the bright colors that we associate with berries here. They're kind of like very muted blue, purple, reddish. So they're not eating a rainbow of foods, and yet they have an incredibly diverse gut microbiome. And seeing that made me rethink this whole thing. Like, is it really the rainbow? Is it really all these diverse foods? They're not really getting all those diverse foods, but they do eat an average of like 40 to 50 grams of fiber per day. So they're having way more fiber than the typical Western person who's only having like 10 to 14 grams of fiber every day. And the other thing is that they're getting exposed to the dirt. They don't wash their hands. There's no such thing as hand sanitizer. So they're out in the field. They're getting, when you pick, and I went with them hunting and foraging, and when you pull that root vegetable out of the ground, they eat it like that. So you're probably getting some soil-based organism, maybe some spore-based probiotic organisms that live in the dirt. So they're getting an incredible exposure that is amplifying their microbiome. And they do not have an incredibly diverse diet. So to me, that was a huge reversal. I'm not saying that we need to become hunter-gatherers, but I think it makes us rethink what is it really that creates diversity of the gut microbiome. I still really strongly believe in fermented foods, which is not really a part of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But there is something to learn from there.
Do you think it may be from just big food and big pharma? They haven't had their guts
antibiotics
in
antibiotics
forever.
like
they've never had their gut disrupted. Ever.
No antibiotic exposure, no exposure to pesticide ridden produce, like two of the biggest disruptors.
Yeah.
No medications. So no, they use natural herbs. I asked them, I sat with the chief and through a translator, I was really curious. I'm like, well, what if you get sick? So everybody gets sick. And the most common thing that they might get is a respiratory infection. And he said they'll use herbs that have been passed down by their ancestors. And I asked them what those herbs were, and he said, we cannot reveal them. Proprietary formula.
The Hamza diet.
So I think they have a head start because they're not within
my new supplement company, Hamza. Just kidding. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Like, I guess it's either their guts haven't been disrupted in ever, and they've stuck to this one diet forever, and we still don't know if diversity is improving or if it's just avoiding what's out there, big food and big pharma. Right.
They did look at their gut microbiome over the season because the diet shifts slightly depending on if it's rainy season versus dry season. And what they found was that there were certain species of bacteria that predominated during the rainy season because they ate a certain way. And during the dry season, it shifted, and some of them would almost disappear, and then a new set would appear. And then when the next rainy season came, the bacteria that seemed to disappear would come back. So it's all dependent partially, which is the same, for us, like our gut microbiome is dependent on how we're eating and what we're exposing it to. Are you eating fast foods? Are you getting exposed to chemicals, pesticides, all those things? All of that influences the gut microbiome as well as stress levels. Mm-hmm. So one thing we asked the chief, the Hadza, do you have a word for depression? They don't have a concept for it. They didn't even understand what we were asking. It doesn't exist in their language. There's not too many languages where the word, because in English we have so many ways to say we're feeling sad, depressed, distraught. We have many words, melancholy. They have zero word for it. It's just not part of their makeup.
Stress balance, hormone balance, gut balance,
and
circadian rhythm balance.
And resilience, because they're living in conditions that if you take a modern human that is used to all of the, conveniences of modern life, they're living out in nature, like they're getting rained on, like they have a level of resilience that I think we've partially lost in our society because of all of the conveniences. And I think that's why it's great that people are getting into things like cold plunging and stuff like that builds that hormetic stress, like creates more resilience for the body.
Now, you mentioned a little bit ago, parasites. My friends who go to Mexico, they come back. This is for you, Tolga. My friend went to Mexico, came back, and his gut has had a lot of issues. So how do you treat a patient with a parasite issue?
If it's a parasite, first, ideally, you're going to try to find out what the parasite is, because depending on the parasite, the treatment might be slightly different. And then there's a lot of different antiparasitic herbs that can be used, but sometimes, as much as I try to avoid prescribing antimicrobials or antibiotics, I've found that with parasites, the most effective thing, especially if you find the parasite, is to use the antiparasitic that is going to be effective against it. The only thing that I find is that a lot of times the given protocol is not enough. So for example, like for Giardia, which is a very common parasite, I ended up actually getting Giardia from going to Guatemala during COVID. And I was extremely sick the minute that I started the antiparasitic, like by the end of the first day, I was already starting to feel better. So they can work really fast.
Antiparasitic.
Yeah, they're antimicrobials, antibiotics, antiparasitics.
So is it a synthetic made in a lab antiparasitic?
Yeah, like any other medication.
But it's less disruptive than and
it's still going to potentially cause problems because there's still crossover with these antiparasitics that still kill good bacteria.
Right.
But a lot of times the treatment, the recommended treatment is one round. Mm-hmm. And I found that a lot of times you've got to repeat the round, at least do 2. Because you might not get all of it in the first round.
Is it a capsule for 30 days, or what is it?
It's usually like a discrete treatment, like 3 days.
3 days of a capsule?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So 2 rounds.
Or a tablet.
2 rounds for 2 weeks?
Let's say it's Giardia. I would do 3 days, take a break, and then 2 weeks later, repeat 3 days again.
Okay.
It depends on the parasite. Like at one point, my mother was diagnosed with strongyloides, which is another parasite that you can get from going to Mexico. And she had all these abnormalities in her blood test, and she was having a very high eosinophil count, which is a type of white blood cell that responds to parasitic infections, but also allergens and all sorts of things. And they didn't know where it was coming from. And I insisted, like, you can't rule out a parasite if you haven't looked for it. And we traveled to Mexico a lot when I was growing up. And parasites can live in you for a long time and be asymptomatic. And then if there's some sort of health shift, suddenly start causing symptoms.
Oh, okay.
So an old infection could be in you for a really long time, and then you have something that throws your immune system off and then allows the parasite to then kind of take over.
So creepy.
So in her, it was causing high eosinophils and anemia. Her blood counts were dropping. And she had other conditions, like she had rheumatoid arthritis, and she had urosepsis. So she had a urinary infection that got into her bloodstream and dropped her blood pressure. And I think that's kind of what kicked up the parasite. And finally diagnosed it. And when we treated her, it was only a one-time dose of a medication that's actually became quite popular in recent years, ivermectin. And one dose of ivermectin reversed all of her blood abnormalities. Her eosinophils normalized, her blood counts came back up. So it was the parasite that was causing that, whereas it's easy to, that's something so general that it would be easy to miss. Because sometimes even blood abnormalities could be caused by many different things. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to find, attribute what is what. And it was actually a lucky find that they found the strongyloides, and it was such a simple treatment of one dose. That's all it took.
And then after taking the ivermectin or the parasitic, do you suggest high fiber or high fermented food or probiotic, postbiotic, or?
Yeah, I mean, after that, I think it's very important to rebuild the ecosystem of the gut. So thinking of the gut as kind of like a garden or like a rainforest ecosystem, it's going to be a little bit messed up because things got out of balance. There was a parasite, right? And you had to do a treatment for the parasite. So that's also going to disrupt things a bit. So you need to go in and you need to do some maintenance work, like get things back in order. And that will involve fermented foods. It could involve a fermented drink. I'm actually a big fan of using like a kefir, whether it's non-dairy or, like you said, like an A2 milk or made at home kefir or homemade yogurt, as a way to repopulate the gut with good bacteria after having been treated for a parasite.
Right.
Because the gut's always going to feel wonky afterwards. It's going to feel like things are not quite right.
Yeah.
And so you want to use these little helpers, which are found in fermented foods, to go in there and help you reorganize the gut ecosystem. Now, with patients of mine, I'm also going to introduce a probiotic, and the probiotic is going to depend on what the particular situation is, and I will have done stool testing to figure out what are the underlying issues, because there's always more things going on. There's maybe leaky gut, maybe there's pancreatic insufficiency. I want to see if their secretory IgA is low, or is it super high because they're fighting off an infection, or is it low, as I said, because their immune system is suppressed. So I then need to support their immune system as well. So I like to look at all these markers to then decide what is the right avenue, what are the right supplements, and what's the right strategy to rebuild the gut after this. Working holistically, like looking at the person, how's your sleep, how's your stress management, how's your lifestyle, are you exercising, because all of these things affect the ecosystem and the gut microbiome.
What made you so interested in the gut and to focus on the gut? Do you have a story?
Yeah. I always had a sensitive gut since I was a kid. I think I was the type of kid that if I was nervous, I felt it really strongly in the gut. I think it's a common symptom of people who are HSPs, highly sensitive people, or empaths, tend to have a lot of gut issues. I like to say kind of jokingly that we digest our emotions in our gut. I think we can feel a lot of things here, like upset and anxiety, depression, things like that. So I had always had a really sensitive gut. And then probably around the age of 10, I started getting infections, like throat infections, strep, lung infection, bronchitis, sinusitis. And my parents would take me to the pediatrician, this is back in the 80s, and antibiotic. Next infection, another antibiotic. Next infection, another antibiotic. So I was on 2 to 3 rounds of antibiotics because it was just the philosophy at the time. No one stopped to ask, why is this kid getting sick over and over? One doctor thought that, I wasn't eating right and that I wasn't getting enough nutrients, so I needed a multivitamin. So he gave me this giant horse pill multivitamin to take, and that was going to fix my immune system. But I kept getting sick because my gut barrier had been compromised because I had a dysbiosis from all of the rounds of antibiotics. I was on 20 plus rounds of antibiotics from the age of 10 to the age of 19. Completely destroyed my gut microbiome. I was a hypochondriac. I was always afraid of being around people that were sick because I felt like I had no immune system. Like I would get anything. The minute I had like a little tickle in my throat, I was chewing garlic. I was taking high doses of vitamin C. Like my dad was.
At what age?
This is like I'm a teenager, like let's say like middle school, high school. My dad was very much into supplementation. So that was kind of in the philosophy of the home, even though we still, went to the doctor and got antibiotics. And as a result of this, I didn't realize this until years later because I developed IBS. I was an anxious kid. And I had at one point eczema on my hands, and all of this because of the gut, mental fog, like fatigue. And it wasn't until I discovered functional medicine in my 30s that I went back and was able to rewrite the story and realize like, I was on multiple rounds of antibiotics. It only takes one round of antibiotics to actually disrupt the tight junction proteins that hold the cells of the lining of the intestine together. So one round of antibiotics is actually going to cause disruption in those tight junction proteins, then causes leaky gut. I had been on 20 plus rounds of antibiotics. I had a major leaky gut. I couldn't gain weight. I wasn't absorbing my nutrients. I was eating like 3,000 to 3,500 calories per day, and I was rail thin. I could not put on weight. I was sensitive to gluten and dairy, along with some other foods, but those were the two biggest ones, gluten being the biggest one. And when I discovered that, once I was studying functional medicine and learned about the microbiome, and like no one told me this in medical school. And if I went to a doctor, they would have given me medications for my symptoms of IBS, which were basically like, I just never knew, like eating out, like it could either sit well or not sit well. And I might be running to the bathroom, or I might be sick the next day. Like but I wasn't making the connection, you know, like pizza for lunch at our resident meeting in the hospital, and then running to the bathroom an hour later every time. And I just thought, yeah, this is just my gut. This is the lot that I got in life, and this is just the way things are going to be, until I learned that I had leaky gut. I had gluten sensitivity.
In your 30s?
Yeah. Yeah, in my 30s.
So until you were 30, you didn't focus on the gut, improving the gut.
I was actually more focusing on, I was always actually focusing on how can I not have these symptoms. I just wasn't putting together the right information. And I was also primarily focusing on how do I not get sick? How can I not get sick every time I'm around somebody who's sick? And that actually happened by accident during medical school, when just because of the change in the lifestyle and having to get to class really early in the morning every day, like I didn't sit at home and eat a bowl of cereal with milk. So dairy kind of got cut out of my diet. And when dairy got cut out of the diet, I stopped getting as many colds. I still got sick, but I wasn't getting sick as often. And I was always observing, like I was always very curious of like little interventions like that. I had cut out dairy. I was eating more fats, like I had incorporated avocados, more olive oil, like I was having more healthy fats. And now I wasn't getting sick as often. So I thought, I kind of put a note to myself, dairy is a problem.
Can you consume dairy now? Now you can?
Yeah, but like I tell people, I'm a seasonal dairy eater, because after years of experimentation, I've realized that if I have dairy, especially in the winter leading up to the spring, then I'm going to get really bad spring allergies. If I avoid dairy, then I barely feel anything.
Oh, interesting. Do you believe that our allergies are related to our genetics, our genes, and our genes are relative to where
everything is related to epigenetics. Right. The gene is just the blueprint. It's not how it's expressed. Every cell in your body holds the entire blueprint for your entire body. And yet the cell here becomes a nail. The cell up here in the cornea becomes the cornea. They're not becoming everything. So everything has to do with expression of the gene code. It's not really the genes themselves, it's how the genes are expressed, and the genes are expressed controlled by things like how we're eating, and by the state of our internal system through our thoughts, our belief system, all those things. So but food is information
for the genes
that influences how the genes are expressed.
Well, there's like this theory that you should eat.
Oh, where do the allergies come from?
You should eat based on your genome, based on where you evolved. So if you check if you have your genome sequenced, you can check and see what they ate in that area for thousands of years. Right?
I think there's something to that. I think it's getting very difficult, because the genetic pool is getting very mixed.
Okay.
Right. But I do think that there is something to like eating as your ancestors ate.
Like Africans, they don't carry the lactase enzyme, so they can't consume dairy, right?
And Asians too.
And Asians.
Yeah. There's a lot of lactase deficiency there.
Do they have cows there?
In Asia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do they don't drink milk ever? They never drink milk. So I wonder why they have this, why they can't consume milk or dairy.
I mean, that's a much more nuanced conversation because the milk that we are being given has been homogenized and basically removed of most of its nutrients, right?
Okay.
Because milk as itself is like a whole food with healthy fats. It's got enzymes. So raw milk actually comes packaged with everything that's needed in order to help you digest the milk. The problem is these homogenized, pasteurized milks that then basically are just concentrating certain things like the sugars and the proteins in milk. So it turned out that I had become, and I find in a lot of patients, that I was sensitive to whey and casein.
Whey and casein?
Yeah. So you were asking, well, where do allergies come from? Where I've seen people's allergies reversed by fixing their gut. So we think like we're blaming the environment, like, oh, it's the pollen, it's spring. No, it's partly your own internal alert system that's being programmed by the health of your gut and the gut lining, because 80% of your immune system is all along the gut lining. So that's, to me, is command central for your immune system. It's controlling how the rest of your immune system functions. If this is in hyper alert, the rest of your immune system is going to be on hyper alert.
Mm. I'm only allergic to cats and dogs. I can only have a hyperallergenic dog. So what can I take to combat that so I can get a dog?
So you can get a dog? Well, you can get a poodle. Hypoallergenic or a poodle mix.
Well, my friends have
dogs. They're really nice because they also don't shed.
Yeah.
You can do all sorts of desensitization therapy for that.
Really?
Yeah. They have like sublingual desensitization therapy.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Maybe one day we'll figure out. I know they've done studies in mice where they've been able to reverse peanut allergy using a specific strain of lactobacilli.
Mm.
So maybe at some day we'll figure out what bacteria programs that response.
I'm really blessed. I don't have any gut health issues. I've never have. I think it has to do with getting my stomach pumped when I was like 5 years old, because I drank my dad's medicine and then I had to get rushed to the hospital and get my stomach pumped.
Jeez.
And then I haven't had antibiotics since I can remember. But I did have Bali belly once for a few days. But my friend and I, we had the same hamburger in the airport in Bali before we left, and he got it bad, and he had to take antibiotics afterwards.
Wow.
So I think...
Yeah, some people have a more resistant gut microbiome. They've looked at the gut microbiome of centenarians to see, is there something different about their gut microbiome that maybe is responsible for their longevity. Mm-hmm. And one thing that they found that was really interesting in centenarians is that they had a greater presence of bacteria that reduce inflammation, whereas people that are like, say, younger in their 80s, but are on like 5 different medications, have diabetes, heart disease, like a bunch of chronic health diseases. If you look at their gut microbiome, they have a larger presence of bacteria that are pro-inflammatory.
Okay, what is the anti-inflammatory gut bacteria, and how do I take it?
But look at what they do in the blue zones. You know, they're eating legumes, they're eating fermented foods,
Japanese tubers.
They're eating all sorts of, like, you know, lots of vegetables, seafood.
Pretty diverse.
It's pretty diverse. So I think I think it's interesting that there's many different paths to Rome, right? Because there's different blue zones all over the world.
They're also not connected to modern medicine, those zones, right? So they haven't been disrupting their gut.
Less use of modern medicine.
Yeah.
There's more of a community aspect. There's a physical aspect, like getting out, walking, being in nature, like Okinawa, Sicily,
aspect, yeah.
Nosara, Costa Rica. There are areas where your nervous system isn't jacked up. Mm-hmm. You're in a much calmer state.
Yeah. So it's taking from the blue zones and moving it to modern society here. That's why I do yoga every night at 7 p.m.
Nice.
Hot yoga.
I do yoga. I do yoga a couple of days per week at home is the first thing I do. Like I was thinking,
morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like sometimes I do bed yoga to start, where I do some yoga stretches in bed.
Oh, okay.
Like, just like pulling my legs up, getting into a child's pose, doing some cat-cow, and then I move to the mat, and then I have a whole yoga routine that I do in the morning.
On video, or you just memorize it? Just memorize it?
No, just memorize. There was a routine that I was doing a lot that I picked up from Gaia during COVID when...
What's Gaia?
Gaia's a
supplement company?
Gaia's a streaming company that has a lot of alternative educational content, like yoga teachers and stuff. And so I was doing a lot of that, and then just became a habit. So I have my routine, and then I go to yoga class as well. So I realized actually I wasn't doing this at the end of last year, and my lower back was getting really stiff from, I think, just being on the computer a lot of hours per day, but also like lifting weights and not doing enough stretching. And I realized, okay, you can't get away with this. Mm-hmm. So I started doing yoga, and it's amazing how much better your body feels.
Yeah. Talk about connecting the brain and body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yoga means union.
Union.
Mm-hmm.
Unionizing the...
It's basically mind and body. Like yoga was practiced before meditation to then, create that connection so then you can relax into a meditation.
Yeah. I feel like it's the quickest way to spirituality. I always tell people yoga changed my life, and commit to 3 days in a row and it'll change your life. Like you'll get it. Like when you do it once and one and done, you're like, okay, that was hard or a lot. But if you do 3 days in a row, it just, everything connects. And
that was the big change for me. I'd been doing yoga. I started doing yoga in 95, the year I started medical school.
Before I was born.
I started doing yoga, breath work, and meditation in 95, before it was even like mainstream. And it became my equalizer. And I did yoga throughout medical school. Was the way for me to like de-stress. Had a yoga teacher that would come to, I lived in Miami Beach, and had a yoga teacher that came to the building, and we did yoga on the deck overlooking the bay at sunset, which was amazing.
In the 80s?
This was back in the 90s.
90s.
Yeah, I'm not that old, but I am old, but I'm not that old. No, then
you were born in the 80s, I think.
I was born in the 70s.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a 70s kid. And then I came to New York for my training, and then you're working like crazy in the hospital. So it was harder to get to do yoga, but whenever I had an easier rotation, I would get back into yoga. And a lot of times, I don't know, if you've worked 100-hour weeks, your body feels beat up. So like the thought of going to the gym and lifting weights after I've done a month-long rotation working 100-hour weeks was like the last thing I wanted to do. And the hack that I figured out was that if once I got into an easier rotation, I did yoga first and, started working on body mobility, then 2 weeks later, I could go back to the gym and I would feel good. Whereas if I went straight to the gym, it was too much for the body.
You have to start where you are, not where you want to be.
So I used yoga throughout as a way to de-stress. And then after I finished my residency, I went on a trip to St. Lucia with a friend and to this all-inclusive resort. And they had a visiting yoga teacher. It was just kind of like an added plus, like, oh, we got a yoga teacher this week and there's going to be yoga every day. And leading up to it, like I was in a bit of a, let's just say like an impasse. I was working in a research project post-residency, and I wasn't sure which way like I wanted my career to go. I was very disillusioned with medicine. I had studied internal medicine, and it's a very drug-heavy style of medicine. And I was just very disappointed in the whole thing. And so I was at times actually even feeling a bit depressed about everything, like not knowing what is my future, like what did I do? Why did I become a doctor? I'm not practicing the medicine that I wanted to practice. And then we went on this retreat.
Salesman, yeah.
Yeah, like pharmaceutical driven medicine, which is not what I wanted. And we went on this retreat and there was yoga every day. And by the end of the retreat, I felt amazing. So I came back to New York and I started looking up and found a yoga teacher training and enrolled right away. Like it was starting the next month.
Oh, you enrolled to be a teacher?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, so I enrolled in this yoga teacher training, and that really deepened my connection with yoga and meditation. And that was, for me, transformative because that was after I had already finished my training, and I felt like I had been pulled a bit away from like where I had started, which was very interested in alternative medicine and all that. And the yoga brought me back to looking at the person as a whole person. Because in internal medicine, we break people down into organ systems. So if someone comes in with a heart attack, they're just the heart attack. We're not looking at the whole person.
Stents. Yeah.
Or if they come in with a pneumonia, they're the pneumonia in the room. Like you're sort of, but you're not. And when I did the yoga teacher training, it brought me back to looking at the body as a whole. I started looking at how people were sitting. How do they hold their body? Are they slouching? Do they sit upright? How are they breathing? Are they using their accessory muscles? Are they breathing with their diaphragm? Most people aren't. They're breathing with their accessory muscles. So it brought me back, and that's the way I found my path eventually to functional medicine, which then was like, wow, I found my family. I found what I was looking for the entire time, and I found the answer to my 2-decade-long issues with my gut that I couldn't figure out.
What excites you in the future of health, combining maybe AI or technology with personalized functional medicine?
There's a lot coming. There's this new test that I'm looking to start doing with my patients that's from a company that has been studying these biomarkers for years, and there's like over 2,000 studies, comes from Stanford University, and it's called IOLO. And they look at over
Oh yeah, I did that.
The 600 plus tests, right?
Yeah,
600 plus biomarkers.
I did that, yeah.
And the cool thing about it is that it's an AI powered test result with different type of AI for the practitioner, the doctor versus the patient. So you can look at your test results and then you can ask a question like, based on my test results, can you design a 7-day diet menu for me? And the AI will put that out. And so I'm working with them because they can also tailor it to my philosophy. So can say, okay, if you want it to recommend in certain directions, we can have the AI tool already programmed that way. And then on my side, because there's so many biomarkers, some of which I don't know enough about, I can go to the AI and ask it like, hey, can you tell me more about this biomarker and what its significance is when I'm reviewing the person's test result, and it'll give me all that information. So I think that AI is going to be really key as part of personalization of medicine, but also looking at these new novel tests that give us important information like biological age and what is the inflammatory status of the person and what are the interventions that they can do to preserve their kidney health, their brain health, their metabolic health, their mitochondria, all of that. And I think this test is amazing because it's the first one that I've seen that you can basically draw your own blood by almost like a needleless system.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable.
Just a patch on your shoulder, I believe what it was.
Yeah, it's kind of like applying a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor. You just punch it into your shoulder, and then you just fill the cartridge with blood, and you're done. And send it back, and so it's a pretty cool test that I think can
results?
Change things.
How were your personal results?
They were not the best, but
mine weren't either.
But I know why.
Mine weren't either, actually.
But I know why, because I was in one of my rounds of where my sugar addiction had gotten the best of me, and so I was eating more sweets. I was in a stress mode and eating more sugar. So that was great feedback. Yeah. Because then I realized, okay, I'm eating too much sugar. I need to cut back on sugar. I'll get my sweet kick from berries and fruit and minimize, and maybe some dark chocolate, but minimize other sources of sugar. And then I'm going to redo the test it takes about, it
took a long time.
Whatever the test shows, it takes about 8 weeks of a dietary intervention to show a difference. So like I would say repeat it 3 months later.
Okay.
After you've changed your diet and see what the results are.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where can the audience find you?
Anywhere on social media. Instagram is probably my biggest, at Dr. Pedre. On YouTube, Happy Gut Life. They can go to happygutlife.com and learn more about all the different things I do, different gut supplements. If they go under education, I try to write really informative blog posts about topics like heavy metals and dark chocolate.
We'll get into those next time.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll come back in a few weeks.
I'd like to, I did one on the mislabeling of grass-fed. Like grass-fed doesn't always mean grass-fed.
Oh, really?
And so we try to do kind of like myth-busting type of blog posts.
Oh, I love that.
I did one on fake honey, how 70% of the honey in grocery stores is actually fake honey. It's been adulterated.
Fake honey, fake olive oil.
Yeah. So I try to look at topics that maybe have a gut angle, but also are really interesting, and put that out there. And also I have a mini course on how to choose the right probiotic on my website.
What's the URL?
happygutlife.com.
happygutlife.com. Okay. Thank you.